Internal Revenue Service IRS tax news. How self-employed individuals and household employers repay deferred Social Security tax. COVID tax tip 2021-96, July 6, 2021. The Coronavirus Aid, Relief, and Economic Security Act allowed self-employed individuals and household employers to defer the payment of certain Social Security taxes on their Form 1040 for tax year 2020 over the next 2 years. Let me see if I can put a little bit of context in on this, a little bit of background for it. Notice, as part of the relief packages related to the coronavirus to support the employees and the employers who are employing them, there were certain benefits that are related to payroll. Now, when you talk about payroll, you're typically getting into payroll taxes oftentimes, and that includes Social Security and Medicare. So anytime you have something that has to do with Social Security and Medicare for employers, then you also kind of have the situation where the self-employed individual is going to come back and say, hey, look, you're treating me as an employer and an employee, charging me both the employer and employee portion of Social Security and Medicare on my basically net income for my Schedule C business. Even if I don't have any employees, I'm still paying Social Security and Medicare as if I'm kind of like the employer and the employee. So therefore, anytime the tax law does something to something like Social Security for payroll taxes to support employees and whatnot, they often have to mirror something on the Schedule C side of things to deal with self-employment tax, which is another form of kind of these payroll taxes, which is basically Social Security and Medicare. So that's where this kind of falls into play, with them kind of trying to match up what they're doing on the employer-employee side to what happens on basically the Schedule C and the self-employment type of situation, as well as possibly household employees. So that back to the text. Half of the deferred Social Security tax is due by December 31st, 2021, and the remainder is due by December 31st, 2022. So how individuals can repay the deferred taxes? Individuals can pay the deferred amount anytime on or before the due date. They can make payments through the electronic federal tax payment system or by credit or debit card, money order, or with a check. Now, there's links to those items here, so you can take a look at them. Just make sure that whatever format you use to pay it, that you're applying it to the correct place so that the IRS doesn't mistakenly, apply it to like income taxes for 2021 or something like that. And because if they get confused on where the payment goes, then of course they may give you a refund mistakenly and then charge you penalties and interest on it. So just make sure you got it signed up to go to the right spot. Should be separate payments from other tax payments to ensure they are applied to the deferred tax balance on the tax year 2020 Form 1040, since IRS systems won't recognize the payment for deferred tax if it is with other tax payments or paid with the current Form 1040. So in other words, you got to make sure you apply it to the right place. If you don't, like I say, the IRS might then apply it to some other item, might actually give you a refund for it, and then charge you penalties and interest for not having paid the thing that you had tried to pay, but you applied it to the wrong place. So if you give them like multiple checks and you send in one 1040 with 2 checks that they're supposed to, you assume that they're just going to apply out to the prior balance or something like that, that might not happen, and that will confuse them. So just make sure that you're separating your payments out and telling them specifically what it is the payment is for, so that they can get that. Now, electronically, if you do it electronically, it's fairly easy to do that because you should be able to choose the year and whatnot and the type of tax that you're making the payment for. Should designate the payment as, quote, deferred Social Security tax, so end quote. So you want to tell them, hey, this is deferred Social Security tax payment. And that should be pretty clear because there's, that's a one-time kind of law. We haven't had deferred Social Security in the past, so they should know where to put it, but you might want to put the year on there as well. So individuals making deferred Social Security tax payments in EFTPS should select 1040 U.S. individual income tax return and deferred Social Security tax for the type of payment. They must apply the payment to the 2020 tax year where they deferred the payment. So you want to make sure you apply it to the year that it was deferred, 2020. Taxpayers can visit the EFTPS.gov for details. There's a link to that here. The individuals should do if they are unable to pay in full by the installment due date. So what if we can't pay? Individuals who are unable to pay the full deferred tax amount should pay whatever they are able to pay by the installment due dates and limit penalties and interest. So they're going to say, hey, give us what you can at that point. If it's late at that point in time, then you're gonna start to accrue penalties and interest. And if you can't avoid that, then it is what it is. And that's kind of part of the problem with some of these deferrals that they did during this time period. It makes sense because you're trying to get people through the tough time and whatnot. But obviously what happens is then, of course, you have other tax obligations that are due, and you have to pay the past tax obligations that were delayed but not waived, and now they're doubling up at some point in the future because, of course, the delayed means you're going to have to pay it along with whatever taxes have been incurred in the current time period. So in any case, if the installment amount is not paid in full, IRS will send the taxpayer a balance due notice. So you pay what you can. The IRS will give you this balance due notice. The taxpayer should allow instructions on the notice to make a payment or apply for a payment plan. So at that point, then you might set up the good old payment plan, making sure that you are in compliance. The main thing you don't want to do, you don't want to just ignore them, right? Because if you just ignore them, that's when the IRS will slowly start basically giving you more letters until they finally take action and whatnot as penalties and interest accumulate upwards. And it's more difficult to communicate with the IRS once that has happened because they give you less leeway. They don't trust you as much, right? And so you want to make sure that you set up the payment plan that should limit the penalties and interest that would be related to it if applicable. So they can also visit the Paying Your Taxes page. There's a link to that here on irs.gov for additional information about ways they can pay, what to do when they can't pay, and viewing your tax account. So there's a link to that here, and there'll be a link to this in the description.